Welcome to the FacDev Lounge podcast, a podcast of faculty development for Dalhousie Medicine, New Brunswick. Today's guest is Dave Veale from Vision Coaching. We haven't, as doctors, been given a lot of training in leadership. We often find ourselves in leadership positions. We often find ourselves feeling resistance and not knowing who to talk to about some of the things that come up in our day-to-day leadership roles. Maybe coaching's for you. Listen to the podcast coming up next with Dave Veale. Hi there, and welcome to the FacDev Lounge podcast. This is the faculty development podcast for Dalhousie Medicine, New Brunswick, and I'm Dr. Sarah Gander, a pediatrician and the host of this podcast. I'm very happy today to welcome Dave Veale, who's a local guy here in St. John, to talk about coaching and leadership, which is something that I really think that sometimes becomes that afterthought for faculty after we do our CME for our medical things and after we worry about our specific teaching objectives, really looking at leadership as something we can focus and hone our skills in. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Sarah, or Dr. Gander. How should I refer in getting a coffee together?
Yeah, please. I think we're on a first name basis.
Great.
So, and you're no stranger to podcasts. So I think I'm a little nervous today because we looked it up before you came on. And is it right that you have like over 500 podcasts on your podcast?
Interviews, yeah. Is the Bowling Point with our mutual friend, Greg Hemmings, is my co-host. I often say I'm on Greg's podcast. And it's been a lot of fun, Sarah. I have learned so much as it relates to leadership, actually, and beyond, and just interviewing, fascinating people from around the world. And I was invited to do. Greg is actually the one that encouraged me to do a podcast with him, and we've been doing it for 6+ years. And it's funny to say this now, but at the time I said I'd love to do this, Greg. And I'm like, what's a podcast? Like I wasn't sure at that time what the podcast was. So a really fun format, and I'm guessing you're enjoying it as well.
Well, it was one of those things that we were just looking for consumable ways of doing faculty development, maybe selfish because I was a mom of young kids and the evening sessions and the afternoon sessions just didn't kind of jive with my life, but something to get me on a treadmill for 30 minutes to listen to definitely was. And so that's sort of what we aim for. But then all of a sudden COVID-19 hits and you're like, oh, consumable information, not in person. I guess we were timely and we didn't even know it.
Awesome. Yeah. And they're built for this time, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we're all experiencing. And I actually think it's been, in many ways, podcasts, the proliferation of them, but also the ease of access and being, and any topic. So when you invited me to this one, I thought I'd love to join you and talk about one of my favorite topics, which is leadership and coaching. And particularly as it relates to physicians and people in healthcare.
Yeah, so I learned about you at sort of a sentinel moment in my career, which was when I took over the department head job of pediatrics here in St. John. And I was on a maternity leave, and it was probably Greg, I'm fairly certain it was Greg actually, who said, have you considered doing some coaching to sort of prepare your brain, prepare your strategy, prepare your sort of transition to a more formal leadership role. And I hadn't even heard that it was even a thing. And I mean, I guess spoiler alert, I did it and it was the most wonderful thing. And so I'm really hoping that we can kind of get into the weeds on that a little bit and showcase that opportunity for people today.
Yeah, no, as much as we can.
So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, knowing what you know now, having experience working with a coach, it in some ways is really hard to describe, and when we do an evaluation, and so it's getting so fun to talk to you about your experience, because when we evaluate, what people think they know about coaching before, and these are clients that wanted to hire a coach before being actively coached, and then after they talk about this, there's this real delta in terms of understanding and valuing what coaching is, but it's always post-coaching. And this kind of is tricky. So I'll be curious for us to talk a little bit about, what you feel and think of it now as compared to maybe when you started, when we first talked about it.
Yeah, I think that, there are opportunities out there for physicians to receive some training and continuing education and support around leadership roles, because I think it's fairly clear to all of us that there's an important component in leadership, particularly when you look at the changing face of healthcare and who's making the decisions, who's dealing with the conflict. I mean, anybody listening who's had anything to do with the planning around the pandemic realizes how much involvement the clinical frontline folks needed to have to really make sure that we were making the right choices quickly. But we know that it's important for those things. There are opportunities, but I guess we all just learn differently. And I had done some of the Canadian Medical Association has like a personal leadership institute that has some really nice in-person online courses that you can take that are really just, so obvious, right? Like money, budgets, conflict, these sorts of things. And they were excellent. And then, of course, you can go to conferences and stuff. And some people can even do like their MBA in policy and health systems and things. But I think what coaching was for me was this moment where I don't know. I was thinking about it when I was preparing and thinking like it was almost like a boutique experience. It was just such an individualized, personalized experience that I didn't need to be the one that asked the questions about being a working mom or asked the questions about, well, what about this? What about this? That was exactly what we unpacked. And I'm sure we'll get to this, but the other thing is just how much it helped me just in life with like relationships. And I often tell the coach I had that she saved my marriage, but my marriage wasn't really that bad, but it made it even better.
Well, and we say so. Vision coaching has run since 2005, so we're coming up on 15 years, and I still think the industry is in its infancy. I mean, the coaching sector or the coaching industry, and the term coaching is used so frequently. And we think many of us would think of a sports coach, and we would have an experience working, playing on a team, and but leadership coaching is very different, and it plays a special place, I believe, in a customized experience. I'm glad you brought that up, at meeting the clients where they are. And I can also speak about it from the perspective of, we also have a philosophy that says, beware of the coach who has no coach. I have a fabulous coach, and she lives on the West Coast, in Vancouver, and has nothing to do with my company. And people would say, well, why would a coach need a coach? And I'm like, well, everyone deserves a coach, and I'm trying to grow and develop, and I'm leading this company, and I've got to think through. You saw my daughter earlier, and being a father of three children, and a husband, and all these things, and a community leader, but also a leader. And so it's so nice to have someone that can meet you where you're at. And it's not a prescriptive thing. It's trying to support you in what you want to accomplish. So I like your expression around this. It is customized, and maybe one of the ways to describe it always, it's kind of like, I think leadership training and development is so important. And so, for me to go to an exercise class with a bunch of people can be really helpful. But then seeing a personal trainer who's going to work around specific needs I might have and goals I might have is kind of how I see coaching fit in terms of one-to-one leadership coaching. Does that fit with your perspective and experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I really was blessed because the way coaching worked for me is that I had some of the coaching before I took on the role, which really allowed me to kind of prepare, I guess, in a lot of ways, both like just with my time and with my headspace. And one of the examples I use is I'm choosing not to use my coach's name out loud because I feel like there is some sort of confidentiality stuff with that. But when she said to me, Sarah, you don't have to choose between your patients and your department head job because the department is one of your patients now. And just like giving that perspective of, oh, I'm allowed, like giving me permission to allow that role to be as important and part of my responsibility was one of like these sort of aha moments that just changed my whole perspective on it. It then became less of a, and off the side of my desk and all the things that we get asked to do, and something that was really something that I could own and really master. And then when I became in that role and she was able to walk me through scenarios and give me strategies of dealing with it, from her experience and just from an outside lens, it so clearly made my start better and more smooth that, yeah, no, I'm eternally grateful that I had that experience. Absolutely.
I mean, and for listeners, maybe they already know this, but when you're getting prepared for, to be a department head, what is it exactly that helps you prepare to step into the role?
Well, at the risk of getting in trouble, I'll just say nothing. Nothing prepares you, right? Because, often these leadership roles are, sometimes they're coveted roles and they're something that you want, and some things you just sort of fall into and it's your turn and things of that nature. I won't tell you what it was for me. But I think any leadership role in medicine, whether it's, being the lead of a course or a block at Dalhousie Medicine, New Brunswick, or if you're running a clinic or if you're managing a research program or something, I think sometimes we find ourselves in these leadership roles and there's very little transition or handover. So there's very little corporate memory in these leadership roles. And so you do really hit the ground running, and baptism by fire and all those expressions. And so worse than not knowing is that you don't even know what you don't know until you happen upon it. And so, you guys use the word coach, and I'd like even unpack it to be like navigator, psychologist, like friend, but also the friend that calls you out on your stuff, and your own sort of fragility and mirroring that happens when you're in those roles.
So I really appreciate the candor, and every industry I've seen, every sector has a similar challenge. And it's often that someone's thrust into a role, and it might be that they were the best engineer or the best practitioner of whatever, technically very strong. And the thinking is if you're, this excellent, whatever it is, accountant, lawyer, whatever, you'd be natural fit to be, to lead a department, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reality that we see, because we work across a variety of sectors, is that what made you really good at whatever that was, being a practitioner, isn't necessarily the same set of skills that's going to support you in leading your former peers.
Mm-hmm.
Because and we have to learn how to lead, and or some of us intuitively understand it, but it's a journey. And to assume that if we use someone who's a really strong salesperson and they're excellent at selling doesn't mean they're the greatest sales manager. And I even take it to, like, if we look at some of our some sports analogies, some of the strongest hockey players didn't actually make particularly good coaches.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different set of skills that's required, and I think people forget that, and they get thrust into these roles. And in fact, there's some really interesting research that was done, or I guess it was a survey done on leaders from all sectors, transformational leaders, and they were asked, "Are you an accidental leader, like you were thrust into position or an opportunity came up, or do you consider yourself an innate leader? You just always felt like you were ready to take a role?" And these are recognized leaders across Canada. It was a professor McGill that did this. And what was interesting, let me ask you a question: how many of these leaders, if we think of percentage, do you think were accidental, and how many would have considered themselves innate?
Huh. Well, given the high incidence of imposter syndrome, I'm going to go like 80-20.
80, 80.
80 thrusts and 20 innate.
Yeah, actually, you know what? You're not far off.
Oh, yay.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't
So,
read that
but
study.
so what's interesting is I just assumed that people would just, naturally thought that was their, their calling, and then but we find a lot of people is just they were put in a position that the calling was more important than maybe how they viewed themselves, and they talk about being accidental leaders, and whether you're innate or an accidental leader, I mean, there's still skills and things we need to learn to be as effective as possible.
Well, I guess there's like not a whole lot of incentives to be a leader sometimes, I remember when they talked about the department head job for us, and it was this sense of, well, one of you should want to do this. And it's like, well, why though? And maybe it's just a different sector, and it's not that sense of having to climb a corporate ladder or that sort of thing. And you certainly don't make any more money doing it. It's just kind of another hat that you wear. And it's like, oh yeah, you're going to pay me no more money to have to deal with all of my colleagues' conflicts. Great. But I think then in previous podcasts, we've talked about positive psychology and how your thoughts kind of determine kind of your actions and what you do next. And I think the thing about coaching is that it turned it from a voluntold sort of situation where you just kind of thought, well, it's my turn to take the hit, to wow, I can really influence change and I do have good ideas. And if I could hone my skills and try to learn with mistakes sometimes, right? That's how we learn where and when to bring certain things up and what battles to fight and timing of things. And that real life, like linear coaching of a strategic plan, if you will, I think has served our department really well.
Awesome. Yeah. I wonder if it would be helpful to, kind of describe the process a little bit, what someone
Yeah.
will sort of experience. Because we're throwing it around and we know what it is. I've been an executive coach for a number of years, but I also mentioned I'm a client. You certainly have experienced it. And for people that are kind of going, well, what exactly happens? This customized experience. And there's a couple things that, if I can talk about you, Sarah, that really make you a wonderful candidate for coaching. So the first thing was that you were very curious and you wanted to learn more about it, right? And we had our initial conversation. We do an onboarding conversation with all our clients, and what we're trying to do is assess their readiness. And not everyone, I would say, and what makes an engaged coachee and ready coachee is someone who's willing to be vulnerable, who recognizes they don't have it all figured out, okay, which is most of us, and is almost like a student of kind of learning and evolving, right? And so there's an interesting qualities there, right? And without those, there's nothing wrong if people don't have those, but it doesn't lend itself as much to coaching. And then what we're trying to do is, and in this case, you had an experience where you met someone who you felt was credible, and everyone would have a different, and that's a coach that you worked with, and I mean, we can use their name. You're allowed to use their name. We're not allowed to talk about our clients, but our clients, I'm very happy to have them share, working with a wonderful coach, who was Dora, and you met her.
And I fell in love.
I saw her as a really good fit, and she just, thought the world of you. And so if you think of a Venn diagram, you've got an engaged coachee in Sarah, you've got a credible coach to Sarah in Dora, right? And then we have a coaching process. And the process is you started with a questionnaire that would have uncovered a lot about who you are or what's driving you outside of what your role is. So that part's really important. And before we even did that, you signed off on confidentiality. So you knew you had a safe place to figure out, how am I going to, get through this and this journey, and if I speak as a client, as a place to be really candid and honest, and it's free of judgment, in terms of the conversations. Would you agree with that, Sarah?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it was always a safe place. And in fact, like the coach, it's not like they're taking you to a place you don't want to go. I think that's the art of coaching, is that, you're going where you're going. They're just kind of helping steer the ship a little bit, and keeping you out, not even keeping you out of, bad waters, just, helping you navigate those things. And so it was always a safe experience and a fun one too, actually. If you are curious and you do have that humble sort of sense of vulnerability too. I mean, I don't think I was like a hot mess going into it. It was more just this sense of like, wow, this is a big role. I was only 10 years into my career. Was it the right timing? I had, just had another baby, this sort of thing, but it's how to go through that. So it is so personal.
Well, and you did something else that's really courageous, I think, is you did a 360 assessment.
Oh,
And
yes. Oh
so
my
people,
gosh.
and this is why you have to have high readiness, right? One of the things we do is we use an online tool where you, Sarah, self-assess. Here's how I feel my leadership is. Your manager would have done a similar assessment, the same assessment actually. Here's how I view Sarah and her leadership. Your peers, anyone reporting to you, and you can have other stakeholders would assess your leadership and generate your report. And what's so valuable as a coach is that now we've got some data and we can say, okay, hey Sarah, you're doing all these things exceptionally well. So you want to make sure you continue to leverage these strengths. Hey, here's some opportunities that people are seeing for you. And we can look at how different rater groups look at leaders, and then we help them develop a plan about how do we want to continue to leverage our strengths, and as well as figure out maybe some of these areas that we're not as strong in, what are the developmental opportunities.
Forgot about the 360. Maybe I blocked it out. Because we were talking about the process, and the process, of course, is this like regular contact with your coach. And, we talk on the phone. It wasn't in person, it was on the phone. And well, now I suppose maybe it's even by Zoom. I don't know how you guys do it, but at the time it was on the phone. And then, yeah, it was proposed that I do this 360, which is super uncomfortable, right? Because you're going to get things because not everybody likes everybody, and that's a thing. And so you think maybe they'll say things that are mean. So you have to have a bit of a thick skin. Hopefully, people are professional about it. But there were things that I was like, okay, you know what? Coaching isn't just about, telling you you're great at everything. It's really looking at those areas of places where you can improve. And like you say, leveraging what your strengths are. So I do remember some of the comments that required a little bit of like, okay, it's all right. That's cool. I just need to sit with that discomfort for a bit and understand that.
Well, and we utilize all sorts of tools within the process, depending on where the client is and what they're willing to do. But it's going to be so helpful, and it's that kind of analysis which creates opportunities. And by the way, we've worked with people that are well established in a role, and are actually doing exceptionally well. So it's not about necessarily just about transitioning to a role, which is a really awesome way to get supportive coach, but also might be in a position. There's a lot of leaders that are in positions where they have no one to talk to, and a
Mhm.
lot going on in their in their life. And wouldn't it be nice to have a safe place to just figure out, okay, what next, and get out of our head and have that stuff reflected back. More importantly, okay, what are we going to do with this?
Yeah. Maybe it's like a less expensive psychologist, or maybe it's about the same price as a psychologist. But no, it's true because there is not a lot of networking amongst sort of that level of leadership, at least where I am, just probably out of busyness and opportunity. And you don't want to always be talking about it at home necessarily. And you learn the hard way that you don't talk to the people you're leading about the gripes of the role and whatnot. So yeah, no, that's a really good point.
Well, I think and then the last thing I would mention the feedback we get is that it is forced reflection. It gives us, some of us permission to sit back and really assess, how are we doing? What are the challenges? And that doesn't always happen naturally.
Hmm.
So it's a process. And then, to be able to share that with, again, in that safe place, it's such an honor to work with people and, help them maybe take on the biggest challenge that they have, or shift or pivot. I'm getting a little tired of saying the word pivot because we're using it so often these days during COVID-19. But maybe pivot the business or whatever that might be, or show up in a different way, or look at things that have been holding them back. It can be used in all those different things. And the other really interesting thing is it's different than mentoring. And a lot of times people use coaching and mentoring interchangeably. And so we follow the International Coach Federation's definition of coaching. And it's kind of like around guiding, like you pointed out. So it's not as really much telling, or mentorship is a wonderful thing. But what I would say about our definition of mentorship, that's a transfer of knowledge. So that would assume that you've had that experience, or that you have that expertise maybe, and you can then share that experience with your mentee. As a coach, a lot of times I'm working with folks, if I use my own experience, that I don't really understand. I don't know enough about their industry, and someone listening might say, "Well, how would that even be possible? How could you coach someone?"
Mm.
And I coach a lot of lawyers for whatever reason. I come from a family of lawyers, so that's probably why. I haven't practiced law. I understand a little bit about the makeup of a stereotypical lawyer, so that might help. But that's not my job. Is to understand, you know, the practice of law as much as try to help them understand how are they showing up in their practice, and how are they maybe developing the practice, and how are they, growing and supporting the people around them.
Mhm.
So it's a bit of a hard thing to sometimes wrap our mind around, but sometimes not being from the industry or in the field is it can be helpful, because you ask questions that might seem like crazy questions, but it can disrupt thinking and create new thinking in our clients.
Yeah.
That makes sense, that
Abs-
description.
Yeah, absolutely. Because while Dora was familiar with the healthcare field, she's not a physician. And so it did sort of take that step back and kind of look at the bigger picture overall. But I think the principles are probably the same no matter who you're coaching, and sort of showing up in a way that you want to show up, and that sort of thing. I really want to talk about, in the last few minutes that we have, the logistics of this, because people might be listening and thinking, oh, this sounds great. Sounds great. Oh, yes, I should probably do this sometime or whatever. But let's talk about some of the perks that might be some carrots for these people, because you guys, MoComp 3 credits, they're the worst. We have no idea how to get them half the time, but they all are based on self reflection. And the Royal College, for those of you who are specialists, recognize personal coaching, particularly the 360 evaluation, as being eligible for the MoComp 3 credits. And so that's an amazing perk because they're a pain in the butt to get, but important and not optional. And, when I did this coaching, it was something that I used as my professional development. And so, was eligible for some of the funding that we get for professional development, but also was able to buy that with the money from my personal corporation because it was a business related expense. And so a bunch of financial reasons that make it a little bit more palatable. Not that it's not affordable. I was actually trying to figure out how much it cost me because this was a couple of years ago. And I just don't even know, and I don't even care because it was worth every penny. And it's not like I have money to throw around day to day. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I don't even care. If it had cost twice as much, I would have paid it.
No, and I appreciate bringing up those extra perks because if that's what helps some people get at it, that's great. And then it qualifies is wonderful, and in every field and every profession has different professional development hours attached to it. But it's really nice to see that being recognized. So for folks listening, if you're interested in, as Sarah mentioned, you have a professional corporation, it actually qualifies for subsidies, government subsidies, particularly as people are trying to come back from COVID. There is some subsidy available. So, and it's really easy to qualify and easy to check it out. And if that makes it easier, then we're naturally going to try to support that.
Mm-hmm. I did like too that I liked that Dora was available outside of kind of the typical daytime hours. It's tailored in that way too. People might just be thinking, oh, I don't have the time to have a conversation, or may even be cringing that it's more online time. But I will say, the coaches are really flexible about the timing, I found. And, there were times that I was sort of out for a walk when I would chat with Dora, but I quickly realized that jotting down some notes and making that personal reflection was also really important. And so not trying to multitask too much.
Well, actually, you bring up another point. We actually offer, and it might be a bit unique, but we offer coaching retainers. We don't offer a set number of hours. Purpose of that is we want to be with our client on the journey. There's a minimum amount of months that we would work with someone, and we don't try to assume. And this is kind of to pick on my lawyer friends. Like, we don't assume that a unit of time is a value. What it is trying to get someone to an outcome. And sometimes that requires more time, and sometimes it requires less time. So we would have regular scheduled meetings. And then because you have this confidential relationship, you've signed off on this confidentiality. We have things called laser coaching. That's when people will text you, a client will text you and say, hey, I just want to bounce something off you. There's this thing that's been bothering me, or this thing's happened. And, and really there to support coaching the whole person. It's not necessarily just the person in their role or the title that they represent.
So I can't close this podcast without telling you the airplane story of Dora, which I know you've heard, but just for listeners, just to give you an idea of how the relationship builds with your coach. I don't know where I was flying from. Let's say Toronto to St. John. I think it was because Dora was on her way back from overseas. She loves to travel. So she's in my heart right now with all of our restrictions. But anyhow, we went through the whole flight. So obviously I didn't know that she was there. She was right beside me. And I heard her speaking to somebody about where she had been. And I was like, that's weird. She was the exact same place that Dora was. And then I started listening to her voice. And so we had never met, right? Like, we had just met on the phone like 100 times. And I was like, oh my God, it's Dora. And I felt like, I don't know, it might have been Michael Jordan. It could have been anybody. It could have been Dave Matthews. It could have been whoever. I was so excited. I felt like I had seen a celebrity. And then it was like the end of the flight. I'm like, are you Dora? And I was like, are you Sarah? I was like, are you kidding me? We just spent a 2-hour flight where we could have, hey man, I could have had a 2-hour coaching session. No, thank God. So she didn't have to coach me for 2 hours. But no,
It is so funny.
it's funny how you just
Yeah.
fall in love and appreciate so much. And I miss her actually. So now after this podcast, I'll probably end up signing up for some more sessions or something.
So it's a good time to sign up, Sarah. And it's an amazing. I've had experiences where I've actually worked with someone over a number of times, and not every. Sometimes doing stuff over Zoom or whatever, or face to face, isn't what people are looking for. And something about being on the phone and just listening to where someone's at can be super intimate and like intense, and you can hear things. So actually, when you physically meet them, I don't know if this was your experience. Sometimes that can throw you off.
It was totally like you should never meet your heroes. Not that she wasn't wonderful and lovely, but I was kind of like, okay, too close, too close. Like this is not how I've managed this
Yeah,
relationship.
and you know what? There's something, it's not for everyone, but there is something about anonymity. Do you know what I mean? And like
Mm.
it's really valuable. And often I'll have people in our region because we work with leaders all over. We actually virtually all over the world, and a heavy concentration in Atlantic Canada, but we work with a lot of people in the States and across Canada. And this year, UK, Brazil, all these different spots that clients find us. And often when it's a local leader coming, I'll offer that maybe they should work with a coach out of the region that they're not going to run into at the city market. And a lot of people take me up on that. One long-term, like standing organization we work with, and their leaders, that's part of the deal is their preference would be work with someone, a CFA, from away. But to run into someone and to finally meet them is such a funny experience.
Oh,
And
wow. We just decided the universe wanted us to meet, and that was lovely. And I'm thrilled. So, Dave, well, how would people go about finding out about coaching, and where do they go to find you?
Yeah, well, so if you just want to find out about the profession of coaching, if you're interested in becoming a coach, whatever, I recommend you go to the International Coach Federation. It's a governing body. I don't know the URL, but I think you can put that into a search engine and you'll get there really quickly. You can learn about the organizations accredited to give coach training and a little bit about the credentialing process and that sort of thing. To find, if you have an interest in talking about working with a coach or you want some more information on coaching training or team coaching or anything like that, you can find us at visioncoachinginc.com, visioncoachinginc.com. And there's no, if a genuine interest in learning more and considering it for yourself, it's a quick phone call just to learn more, and happy to do that. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about and sharing your experience, Sarah. And really the way that our business has grown over the years is through referrals, and it's through people sending, clients our way because they had a good experience like you did. And so we're just, that's just huge for us. And it just tells us that, how much you value the experience. And that's the whole goal, is to create a valuable experience for someone. And I'll just leave it with that, not every situation, not everyone is looking to work with a coach either. And that's okay as well. But when you do, when they find it at the right time and the right coach and, and the process meets what you're looking for, it can be very powerful.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming today and coming into our faculty development lounge. It was really nice to have you. And thank you for all you do. I mean, outside of just even supporting your local business, I'm just so pleased with my experience and can't recommend you highly enough. So thanks again for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Fun time. Nice being on the other side of the microphone.
Wonderful. Have a great day.
You too.